"Your Honor," my son-in-law said, standing in the middle of that courtroom like he owned the walls, "this woman is just a waitress." A few people behind him laughed. Not loudly, not enough for the judge to bang his gavel. Just that ugly little courtroom laugh people give when they think cruelty sounds clever. My granddaughter Sophie sat beside me, both hands wrapped around a cream-colored envelope her mother had written before she died. She was 16 years old, wearing the navy dress I bought her for the funeral 6 months earlier, and her face was so pale, I thought she might faint. My son-in-law Ryan Whitaker turned slightly so the gallery could see him. She expects this court to believe he continued that a woman who spent her life carrying coffee refills and wiping tables can manage $20 million. More laughter. The judge looked down at his papers. Ryan smiled. And then Sophie stood. Not fast, not dramatic, just slowly, like something inside her had finally had enough. She opened her mother's letter with shaking fingers, looked straight at her father, and asked one question. The entire courtroom went silent. But to understand why that question mattered, and why that money was never really about money, I need to begin before the lawsuit, before the judge, before the newspapers started calling my daughter's estate the $20 million inheritance battle. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 68 years old, and for 43 of those years I worked at Ruby's Diner on the edge of Franklin, Tennessee. If you have ever driven south of Nashville and stopped at a place with red vinyl booths, fried okra sweet tea, and waitresses who call everybody honey, then you know the kind of place I mean. Ruby's wasn't fancy. It had chipped coffee mugs, a bell above the door, and a lunch counter where farmers, teachers, mechanics, and church ladies solved the world's problems between refills. I started there when I was 22, newly married, scared half to death, and pregnant with my only child. My husband Thomas worked construction. Good man, strong hands, bad lungs. He passed when our daughter Emily was 12, and after that, the diner became more than a job. It became the thing that kept the lights on, the mortgage paid, and my little girl in shoes that fit. I was not educated in the way people like Ryan respect. I never had framed diplomas on a wall. I never wore designer suits or spoke in legal phrases. I balanced tips in a coffee can and stretched paychecks until they squeaked. I learned numbers because I had to. Rent, groceries, medicine, school supplies, car repairs. Every dollar had a job. Emily used to sit in the back booth after school with her homework spread out beside a slice of pie Ruby didn't charge us for. Even as a child, she watched everything. She watched customers, watched business owners, watched how people treated workers when they thought nobody important was listening. One night when she was about 14, a man snapped his fingers at me for more coffee. Emily's face turned red. "Mom," she whispered after he left, "why do you let people talk to you like that?" I wiped down the table and smiled at her. "Because his rudeness doesn't pay our electric bill. My work does." She never forgot that. Maybe that was where her steel came from. Emily grew up smart, but more than that, she grew up observant. She earned scholarships, studied business, and built a small home medical supply company from our kitchen table after seeing how many elderly folks in our town struggled to get walkers, oxygen tubing, and hospital beds delivered on time. She started with one used van and a notebook full of contacts. By 41, she had offices in 3 states. By 44, she sold part of the company and kept enough ownership that her lawyers started using words I never used in my life. Assets, holdings, trust structures, long-term estate planning. I was proud of her, but not because of the money. I was proud because she never forgot the old people who made her care in the first place. Then she married Ryan. At first I wanted to believe he loved her. He was handsome in that polished country club way. Perfect haircut, clean watch, smile ready before anyone asked for it. He worked in commercial real estate and knew how to walk into a room as if he had already checked the value of everything inside it. Emily met him at a hospital fundraiser in Nashville. For a while, he seemed attentive. He brought flowers. He complimented Sophie. He called me Miss Margaret and told everyone he admired hard-working people. That phrase bothered me even then. Hard-working people. As if we were a category separate from people like him. But Emily seemed happy, and Sophie, who was only 9 when they married, wanted a father figure so badly that I swallowed my doubts. Over the years, Ryan became harder to ignore. He joked too often about my job. At Thanksgiving, he once said Margaret knows more about tips than investments. Emily's smile vanished. I laughed it off because that is what waitresses learn to do. You laugh so the room doesn't become uncomfortable. But Emily didn't laugh. After dinner, she found me washing dishes and said, "Mom, don't ever let him make you feel small." I told her, sweetheart, a man like Ryan can't make me anything I don't agree to become. She hugged me from behind. I felt her tears on my shoulder. That was one of the first times I understood something was wrong. Not obvious wrong? Not the kind of wrong people notice from across a room. It was the quieter kind. The kind that hides inside bank statements, passwords, private arguments, and the way a woman's voice changes when her husband walks in. Emily started calling me late at night. At first she talked about business. Then Sophie. Then nothing at all. She would sit on the phone breathing, and I would ask, honey, are you okay? I'm just tired, Mom. Tired became her answer for everything. Then in the spring of her 46th year, Emily got sick. At first everyone thought it was stress, then anemia, then something worse. By the time doctors gave it a name, the room had already gone quiet in that way hospitals do when nobody wants to say what everyone knows. Cancer. Fast. Unfair. Merciless. During those final months, Emily changed her will. She did not tell Ryan. She told me. One afternoon, sitting in a recliner beside the window, thin as paper but still my daughter, she handed me a folder. Mom, she said, I need you to protect Sophie. I looked at the legal pages and shook my head. Emily, I don't know how to manage this kind of money. Yes, you do. I'm a waitress. Her eyes sharpened. No. You're the woman who kept us alive when Dad died. You're the woman who never spent a dollar she didn't understand. You're the only person I trust to remember that this money belongs to Sophie, not to whoever can grab it first. I cried then. She didn't. She had already done enough crying before I arrived. The trust placed me in charge of Sophie's inheritance until she turned 25. Education, medical care, housing, and basic support could be provided, but Ryan would have no direct access, not $1. Emily also gave her attorney a sealed letter for Sophie. Not yet, she told me, only if he challenges the trust. I knew who he meant. 6 months after Emily died, Ryan filed the lawsuit. He claimed I was unqualified. He claimed Emily had been influenced. He claimed a waitress could not possibly manage $20 million. And on the morning we walked into court, Sophie carried her mother's sealed letter in both hands, like it was the last living piece of her. Ryan thought that courtroom would expose me. He had no idea it was about to expose him. The first time I realized my daughter no longer trusted her husband, she wasn't talking about money. She was talking about Sophie. That memory stayed with me during every court hearing, every meeting with attorneys, and every sleepless night after Ryan filed his lawsuit. 3 months before Emily died, I drove her home from a medical appointment in Nashville. The treatment had left her exhausted. She sat in the passenger seat looking out the window as rolling Tennessee hills passed by. For almost 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she suddenly asked, Mom, do you remember when Dad died? The question caught me off guard. Of course. What scared you most? I didn't answer immediately. After 40 years, the memory still felt fresh. The bills. Emily smiled sadly. Not being alone? Oh, I was terrified of being alone. I glanced toward her. But being afraid doesn't stop the electric company from sending bills. She laughed softly. That laugh sounded fragile. Then she became serious. You always figured things out. No. I shook my head. I figured out the next thing. That was the truth. People imagine widows become strong all at once. We don't. We survive one day, then another, then another. Strength is usually just survival stretched over time. Emily looked down at her hands. I wish Ryan understood that. Those words sat heavily between us, because by then I already knew their marriage wasn't healthy. Not catastrophic, not publicly explosive, but unhealthy. Ryan loved success. He loved appearances. He loved being seen as successful even more. The trouble was that Emily had built most of the wealth, and as her business grew, Ryan became increasingly focused on controlling it. At first, the changes were subtle. He wanted access to accounts. He wanted to review investments. He wanted to help manage things. Reasonable requests on the surface. But Emily began noticing a pattern. Every conversation eventually returned to money. Every disagreement somehow involved control. Every decision became a negotiation. The worst part wasn't greed. It was entitlement. Ryan slowly began acting as though Emily's success belonged to him. One evening, Emily called me after Sophie had gone to bed. Her voice sounded exhausted. Mom, what's wrong? There was a long pause. Then, I checked our accounts. I waited. Ryan moved money again. That wasn't the first time. Nor would it be the last. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just transfers. Investments. Financial decisions made without discussion. Each one small enough to explain away. Together they painted a different picture. What did he say? Emily laughed bitterly. The same thing he always says. And what's that? We're married, what's yours is mine. I felt my stomach tighten. Not because the phrase was technically wrong, because of how he used it. Marriage is an ownership. At least not the way Ryan seemed to believe. Over the next several months, Emily became increasingly cautious. She started reviewing documents personally. She met privately with attorneys. She updated beneficiaries. She reorganized business structures. Ryan didn't know, at least not at first. The more serious her illness became, the more urgent those conversations felt. One afternoon, I accompanied her to a meeting with her estate attorney, a kind woman named Rebecca Lawson. The office overlooked downtown Nashville. Everything smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Rebecca carefully reviewed the trust documents. Then she looked directly at Emily. Are you certain? Emily didn't hesitate. Yes. Rebecca glanced toward me. Your mother understands the responsibility. I immediately shook my head. No. Both women laughed. Then Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. That's exactly why she's the right person. Rebecca smiled. I've heard that answer before. After the meeting ended, Emily and I sat in a nearby park. The weather was beautiful. Children played near a fountain. Young couples walked dogs. Normal life continued around us. Emily watched a little girl feeding ducks. Then she quietly said, If something happens to me, Ryan will come after the money. I wanted to disagree, wanted to reassure her, wanted to believe she was wrong. But I couldn't, because deep down I suspected the same thing. Maybe not. Emily looked at me. The look said she appreciated the effort, even if she didn't believe it. Mom. Yes, if he does promise me something. My throat tightened. Anything. Protect Sophie. The simplicity of the request made it harder. Not protect the business. Not protect the estate. Not protect the money. Protect Sophie. Money was simply the battlefield. The real issue was her daughter. A week later, Emily gave Rebecca the sealed letter. Only 3 people knew it existed. Emily, Rebecca, and me. Ryan never knew. Sophie didn't either. The letter wasn't intended as revenge. It wasn't even intended for court. It was a mother's final conversation with her child. A conversation Emily feared might become necessary someday. As her condition worsened, she spent more time with Sophie. The two became inseparable. Movie nights, ice cream runs, long conversations, small ordinary moments, the kind people suddenly treasure when time becomes limited. One evening I arrived for dinner and found them sitting on the back porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the horizon. Sophie leaned against her mother. Emily held her hand. Neither noticed me standing inside. Then Sophie asked, Are you scared? The question nearly broke me. Emily answered honestly, A little. Sophie squeezed her hand. I'm scared too. Emily smiled. I know. Then she said something I will never forget. Being scared doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. At the time I thought she was talking about illness. Later I realized she was talking about much more. Emily died 11 weeks later. The funeral filled an entire church. Business associates attended. Employees attended. Friends attended. Neighbors attended. People whose lives she had quietly helped attended. Ryan cried. So did I. So did Sophie. Grief makes everyone look honest. Unfortunately, grief doesn't change character. The first major problem appeared less than 3 weeks later. Ryan requested access to trust accounts. Rebecca denied the request. Ryan became angry, then confused, then furious. Because for the first time he discovered something unexpected. Emily had anticipated him. Every safeguard was already in place. Every protection had already been prepared. Every legal document had already been signed. The inheritance belonged to Sophie, and until Sophie became an adult, the trustee was me, a 68-year-old waitress from Ruby's Diner. 2 months later, Ryan filed his lawsuit, and the war officially began. The first day of the trial felt strangely ordinary. That surprised me. For months, Ryan had acted as though this lawsuit would be a dramatic public correction. He seemed convinced the court would immediately recognize him as the logical choice to control Sophie's inheritance. Instead, the process was slow, methodical. Paperwork, testimony, financial records, legal arguments. The truth rarely arrives with fireworks. It usually arrives carrying folders. By the 3rd day of hearings, I had learned exactly how Ryan intended to win. He wasn't attacking the trust itself. That would have been difficult. Emily's attorneys had done their work carefully. Instead, Ryan was attacking me. My age, my education, my profession, my background. Everything he believed made me inferior. The strategy became obvious during the testimony of his first witness, a business consultant from Nashville. The man wore an expensive suit and spoke confidently. Ryan's attorney asked, "Would you typically recommend that someone with Mrs. Ellis's professional background manage a $20 million trust?" The witness smiled politely. "No." "Why not?" "Modern financial management requires sophisticated knowledge." The attorney nodded. "And what is Mrs. Ellis's occupation?" The witness glanced toward me. "I understand she worked as a waitress." Worked. Past tense. As though the years themselves had somehow erased what I knew. The attorney smiled. "No further questions." Ryan looked pleased, as though the case had somehow been advanced by insulting my job. Unfortunately for him, the judge looked bored. Very bored. That became a recurring problem for Ryan. Judges tend to care more about facts than status. Still, the attacks continued. The following day, another witness discussed investment complexity. Another discussed business management. Another emphasized education. Each testimony carried the same hidden message. How could a waitress possibly handle this responsibility? At lunch, I sat quietly beside Rebecca Lawson. Neither of us spoke much. Finally, she asked, "How are you holding up?" I smiled. People have been underestimating waitresses my entire life. That made her laugh. The truth was, Ryan fundamentally misunderstood my generation, especially women my age. Many of us didn't build resumes. We built lives. We managed households, raised children, balanced budgets, solved crises, cared for aging parents, worked full-time jobs, and somehow stretched every dollar farther than anyone thought possible. No university had taught me that. Life did. The following morning, Rebecca finally called me to testify. The courtroom felt quiet as I approached the witness stand. Ryan watched me carefully, confident, expectant, almost eager. I suspect he believed I would become nervous, maybe even embarrassed. Instead, I sat down and adjusted my glasses. Rebecca began gently. "Mrs. Ellis, how long did you work at Ruby's Diner?" 43 years. "Did you manage money there?" A few people smiled. The question sounded simple. "Every day." "Can you explain?" I nodded. For decades, I handled cash deposits, payroll records, inventory orders, vendor payments, and daily balancing. Ryan's attorney immediately objected. Not because I was wrong, because he didn't like where the answer was going. The judge overruled him. I continued. "I also managed my household finances after my husband died." Rebecca nodded. "How old was your daughter when you became a widow?" 12. "Did you receive significant financial assistance?" "No." "Did you lose your home?" "No." "Did your daughter graduate college?" "Yes." "Without major debt?" "Yes." The courtroom remained quiet. Rebecca smiled slightly. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Mrs. Ellis, approximately how much money passed through your hands while helping build your daughter's company?" Ryan's attorney looked startled, because suddenly the conversation wasn't about coffee refills. It was about history. I answered honestly, "Millions." The room became still. Rebecca continued, "Please explain." So I did. Not dramatically, just truthfully. Emily trusted me. When her company was small, I handled invoices, processed paperwork, managed payroll during staffing shortages, reviewed accounts, tracked expenses, helped coordinate deliveries. Nothing glamorous, just work. Year after year, business after business, problem after problem. The company grew, and through all those years, Emily repeatedly asked for my advice. Not because I was educated, because I was careful. The difference matters. Rebecca looked toward the judge. "Did Emily trust your judgment?" "Yes." "Did she trust it enough to place you in charge of her daughter's future?" "Yes." No further questions. Ryan's attorney stood immediately. Aggressive. Confident. Exactly as expected. "Mrs. Ellis, do you possess a finance degree?" "No." "MBA?" "No." "Professional investment certifications?" "No." He smiled, then delivered what he clearly considered the winning question. "So why should anyone believe you're qualified to manage $20 million? The courtroom became silent. I looked directly at him, then answered, "Because I know it isn't mine." Several people shifted in their seats. The attorney blinked. I continued. "The money belongs to Sophie." Silence. "Not me." More silence. "Not Ryan." Even more silence. "My job isn't to spend it." I folded my hands. "My job is to protect it." For the first time all week, Ryan looked uncomfortable, because the entire case suddenly became simpler. Not qualifications, not status, not prestige, intent. Why did Emily choose me? The answer wasn't hidden in financial charts. It was hidden in trust. That afternoon, another problem emerged for Ryan. His own testimony. Under questioning, he repeatedly described the inheritance as though it already belonged to him. Not intentionally, habitually. The language kept slipping out. My money. My family's money. My resources, Rebecca noticed. So did the judge. So did everyone else. By the end of the day, small cracks had begun appearing. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. Enough to make people wonder. Enough to make the judge start asking questions. Enough to make Ryan lose some confidence. Then on the 5th day of trial, Rebecca stood and announced something nobody expected. Your Honor, the trust has one final piece of evidence. The courtroom grew quiet. Even Ryan looked confused. Rebecca opened a file, then carefully removed a cream-colored envelope. The same envelope Sophie had carried into court every day. My daughter's letter. And suddenly everything changed. Rebecca held the envelope carefully. For a moment, nobody in the courtroom moved. Not Ryan. Not the judge. Not the attorneys. Not even Sophie. Everyone seemed to understand that whatever happened next mattered. The cream-colored envelope looked ordinary. No gold seal. No dramatic markings. Just my daughter's handwriting across the front. For Sophie, seeing those words nearly broke me. Because suddenly Emily wasn't just a memory. She was present again. Present in the room. Present in the silence. Present in the trembling hands of the daughter she loved more than anything. Rebecca approached the judge's bench. After several minutes of discussion, the judge nodded. Then he looked toward Sophie. Miss Whitaker. Sophie's shoulders stiffened. Yes, Your Honor. Your mother wrote this letter for you. Yes. Would you like to read it yourself? The question seemed to surprise her. For several seconds she stared at the envelope. Then she nodded. Yes, my heart hurt watching her walk toward the witness stand. 16 years old. Still grieving. Still trying to understand a world that had taken her mother far too soon. Yet somehow stronger than many adults I knew. The courtroom remained completely silent as she sat down. Rebecca handed her the letter. Sophie carefully unfolded the pages. I recognized Emily's handwriting immediately. Neat. Precise. Confident. Exactly like her. Sophie's voice shook when she began. My sweet Sophie. The first words alone caused several people to lower their eyes. Including me. Because every parent in that room understood. This wasn't evidence. This was a mother's final conversation with her child. Sophie swallowed hard and continued. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer beside you. The courtroom felt smaller. Warmer. Sadder. I wish I could tell you this in person. I wish I could watch you grow older. I wish I could see who you become. Sophie's voice cracked. The judge quietly handed her a box of tissues. She smiled weakly, then continued reading. I need you to know something important. A long pause. I have always trusted you. Not your grades, not your accomplishments, not your future career. You, the person you are. Tears rolled down Sophie's cheeks. Across the courtroom, Ryan stared at the floor. For the first time since the trial began, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. The letter continued. When people talk about inheritance, they usually mean money. Sophie's voice steadied slightly. But money isn't the most valuable thing a parent leaves behind. Several jurists in the gallery nodded quietly. Emily always knew how to find the heart of a subject. The most valuable inheritance is character. I closed my eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like her. Then the tone of the letter changed. Not harsher. More direct. If a day ever comes when people argue over what I've left behind, I need you to understand why I made certain decisions. Ryan looked up immediately. The room became still. Everyone knew we had reached the part that mattered legally. Sophie continued. I chose Grandma Margaret to protect your inheritance because she understands responsibility better than anyone I know. My throat tightened. I wasn't prepared for that. Not after all these months. Not after all these hearings. Not after all the insults. Your grandmother spent her entire life taking care of people. Sophie's voice grew stronger. She never chased wealth. She never measured people by status. And she never spent money that belonged to someone else. Across the room, Ryan's attorney stopped taking notes. The shift was subtle, but noticeable. Emily continued. When I was building my company, Grandma helped me more than most people realize. Sophie's eyes moved steadily across the page. She reviewed invoices, managed payroll emergencies, balanced budgets, helped solve problems, and reminded me every day that success means nothing if it costs your integrity. I felt tears gathering, not because of the praise, because Emily remembered. Children often remember more than we think. Then came the section that changed the atmosphere completely. Sophie took a deeper breath before reading. If your father challenges these decisions. Ryan immediately stiffened. Every person in the courtroom noticed. Please understand that I did not make these arrangements lightly. The silence deepened. I loved your father. Another pause. I truly did. Ryan finally looked up. His eyes remained fixed on the letter. But love does not erase reality. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Sophie continued. Over the years, I became increasingly concerned about your father's relationship with money. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even shuffled papers. He often viewed financial security as something to control rather than something to protect. Ryan's face turned pale. The judge watched carefully. The attorneys watched carefully. Everyone watched carefully. I witnessed decisions that frightened me. Sophie swallowed, then continued. Promises that were broken. Money moved without discussion. Priorities that placed appearance above responsibility. The room remained frozen, because suddenly this wasn't an attack from me, or an argument from attorneys. This was Emily, speaking directly. Months after her death, Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time all trial, he looked trapped. Then Sophie reached the paragraph that none of us knew existed. Not even me. Her eyes widened slightly. She read it again silently, then looked up. What is it? Rebecca asked gently. Sophie stared at the page. Tears filled her eyes again. My mom? Her voice broke. What does it say? The judge asked softly. Sophie looked across the courtroom, directly at her father, then back at the letter, and slowly read the next sentence. If your father ever takes your grandmother to court over this inheritance. The room became completely silent. There is one question I hope you'll be brave enough to ask him. Ryan stopped breathing, or at least it looked that way. Sophie's eyes locked onto her father, and for the first time in the entire trial, genuine fear appeared on his face. Sophie looked at her father. Ryan looked back at her. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched so long that even the judge seemed reluctant to interrupt it. Finally, Sophie lowered her eyes to the letter. Her hands were trembling again. But this time it wasn't from grief. It was from courage. Some moments change because someone powerful speaks. Others change because someone vulnerable does. This was the second kind. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper when she continued. My mother wrote. She stopped, swallowed hard. Then read the next line. Ask him this, Sophie. Ryan shifted in his chair. His attorney leaned toward him. Ryan didn't seem to notice. His eyes never left his daughter. Sophie looked up, straight at him, then asked, Dad! The room became perfectly still. If this money was really about taking care of me? Her voice cracked. Why did you wait until Mom died to fight for it? Silence. Absolute silence. Not courtroom silence. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that happens when a truth lands exactly where it belongs. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody shuffled papers. The judge simply stared. Ryan blinked. Once, twice. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since the trial began, he looked like a man who had run out of prepared answers. Because he had. His entire case had been built around legal arguments, financial qualifications, trust structures, professional credentials. He had prepared for lawyers. He had prepared for judges. He had prepared for me. He had not prepared for his daughter. Especially not his daughter asking the question Emily had known would matter most. Sophie continued staring at him, waiting, not angrily, not dramatically, just waiting, the way children do when they genuinely want the truth. Ryan finally cleared his throat. That's not fair. The answer landed badly. Even he seemed to realize it. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I didn't ask if it was fair. Silence again. I asked why. The judge leaned back slightly. Rebecca said nothing. Ryan's attorney said nothing. Nobody wanted to interrupt, because everyone understood what was happening. The lawsuit had stopped being about $20 million. Now it was about motive, character, truth. Ryan tried again. I was trying to protect your future. Sophie's face didn't change. Then why didn't you trust Mom's wishes? The courtroom seemed to shrink. Ryan looked toward his attorney, toward the judge, toward anyone except his daughter. But Sophie kept looking directly at him. For years, he had been able to redirect conversations, change subjects, explain things away. Not today. Today, the person asking questions was the one person whose opinion truly mattered, and she wasn't letting go. Ryan rubbed his forehead. The confidence that had carried him through weeks of testimony was gone. Completely gone. I loved your mother. I know. The answer came instantly. That surprised him. It surprised me too, because there was no bitterness in Sophie's voice, only sadness. I know you loved Mom. Another pause. That's why I don't understand. The words hurt more than any accusation, because confusion is harder to defend against than anger. Ryan lowered his eyes. For the first time he seemed genuinely ashamed. Not embarrassed. Ashamed. The distinction matters. One is about how people see you. The other is about how you see yourself. The judge finally spoke. Mr. Whitaker. Ryan looked up. The judge's voice remained calm. Would you like to answer your daughter's question? The room waited. Ryan opened his mouth. Closed it. Then something unexpected happened. He shook his head. Just slightly. Almost imperceptibly. But I saw it. And so did Sophie. Because for the first time all trial, Ryan wasn't refusing to answer. He couldn't answer. Not honestly. Not without admitting something he had spent months denying. That the lawsuit had never really been about Sophie. The silence itself became the answer. Rebecca quietly stood. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce several financial records already submitted into evidence. The judge nodded. The next hour unfolded slowly, carefully, methodically. Bank transfers, emails, investment requests, business communications. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just pattern after pattern, decision after decision. A picture emerged, not of a devoted father desperately trying to protect his child, but of a man increasingly focused on controlling money he believed should belong to him. Each document made Ryan smaller, not physically, morally. The most damaging evidence wasn't illegal behavior. It was selfish behavior. And selfishness is much harder to defend in front of your own daughter. At one point, Rebecca displayed an email Ryan had sent nearly a year before Emily died. The message discussed future access to trust assets. The date appeared prominently on the screen. Months before Emily's final hospitalization. Months before anyone knew how little time remained. The judge studied the document carefully, then looked toward Ryan. You were already discussing access to these funds while your wife was alive. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. That isn't what I meant. The judge didn't argue. He simply made a note. Sometimes judges say more with a pen than with words. By late afternoon, Ryan's case had collapsed. Not dramatically, quietly, like a house whose foundation had been weakening for years. Even some of his relatives sitting in the gallery no longer looked supportive. Several avoided eye contact entirely. One older cousin actually shook his head. Sophie remained seated beside me, still holding her mother's letter, still processing everything. At one point, she slipped her hand into mine. I squeezed it gently. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. When the final testimony concluded, the judge gathered his papers. The courtroom stood. Then he paused. I will review the evidence and return tomorrow morning with my decision. Nobody reacted. Nobody celebrated. Nobody complained. The emotional battle had already ended. Tomorrow would only determine the legal outcome. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Ryan remained seated, alone, staring at the table. Sophie looked toward him. For a moment I thought she might walk over. Instead, she folded her mother's letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, and quietly followed me out. Behind us, Ryan never moved. For the first time in a very long time, he had been forced to face the difference between wanting money for someone and wanting money from them. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse before anyone else in my family. Old habits die hard. When you've spent decades opening a diner before sunrise, you learn to arrive early for everything. The courthouse lawn was still damp with morning dew. The air carried that cool Tennessee softness that disappears by noon. I sat on a wooden bench near the entrance and watched people hurry toward work. For a few minutes, nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew about the lawsuit. Nobody knew about $20 million. Nobody knew about dead daughters, grieving granddaughters, or broken families. I was just an older woman sitting quietly with a cup of coffee. And honestly, that felt nice. The previous afternoon had changed something. Not because Ryan lost the argument. Because Sophie found her voice. That mattered more. By the time Rebecca arrived, the courthouse parking lot had begun filling. She sat beside me. You sleep at all? I smiled. A little. She laughed. You're a terrible liar. 43 years serving customers. I learned not to waste lies when the truth works fine. Rebecca shook her head. You remind me of Emily. That almost broke me. Because even after all these months, hearing my daughter's name could still hit without warning. Before I could answer, Sophie's car pulled in. She climbed out holding the envelope again. Not because she needed it. Because she wasn't ready to let it go. I understood. Some objects become sacred after loss. A letter, a photograph, a voicemail, a sweater that still smells like someone you miss. Sophie walked over and hugged me. "Good morning, Grandma. You okay?" She nodded, then immediately shook her head. That made me smile. It was the most honest answer possible. A few minutes later, Ryan arrived. Alone. No relatives. No supporters. No confident smile. Nothing like the man who had strutted into court on the first day. He looked older, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent an entire night staring at a ceiling. For a brief moment I felt sorry for him. Not because of the lawsuit, because grief had reached him too late. By the time court resumed, every seat in the gallery was filled. Word had spread. Small towns run on stories. This one had become impossible to ignore. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The room fell silent. He reviewed several documents, adjusted his glasses, looked down at his notes, and began. The decision lasted nearly 40 minutes, longer than most people expected. The judge carefully summarized the evidence: Emily's estate planning, the trust, the testimony, the financial records, the letter, Sophie's question. Everything. No dramatic speeches, no television-style courtroom surprises. Just facts, one after another. Steady, measured, final. Then he reached the conclusion. The court finds that Emily Whitaker established this trust knowingly, voluntarily, and with clear intent. Ryan lowered his eyes. The judge continued. The court further finds that Margaret Ellis has acted appropriately in her role as trustee. My heart pounded. Not from excitement. Relief. The kind of relief that arrives after carrying something heavy for too long. The trust shall remain in effect. Silence. The assets shall continue to be managed for the sole benefit of Sophie Whitaker. More silence. Then, the plaintiff's petition is denied. It was over. Legally, at least. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. This wasn't that kind of victory, because the real cost had never been legal fees. The real cost was what the lawsuit revealed. As people slowly began standing, Sophie squeezed my hand. Hard. Not because she was happy, because she missed her mother. I did too. Ryan remained seated. The courtroom gradually emptied around him. Eventually, only a handful of people remained. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan stood and walked toward us. Not quickly, not confidently, just slowly, like a man carrying a weight he could no longer hide from. Sophie stiffened. I said nothing. Ryan stopped several feet away. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he looked directly at his daughter. "I'm sorry." The words sounded strange coming from him. Not rehearsed. Not strategic. Raw. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Neither would I have. Apologies are important, but trust grows slower. Finally, she asked, "For what?" A simple question. A difficult one. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. I stopped thinking about what your mother wanted. Silence. I convinced myself I was right. Another silence. And somewhere along the way, his voice broke. I stopped listening. No lawyers. No judge. No audience. Just truth. For the first time in a long time. Sophie cried. Ryan cried. I cried too. Because healing rarely begins with winning. It begins with honesty. Months passed. Life moved forward. Slowly. As it always does. Ryan began counseling. Not because a court ordered it. Because he finally understood he needed it. His relationship with Sophie didn't magically repair itself. But it improved. One conversation at a time. One visit at a time. One honest apology at a time. Meanwhile, I continued serving as trustee. College planning. Investment reviews. Budget meetings. Scholarship applications. All the boring things responsible adults do. The $20 million remained exactly where Emily intended it to remain. Protected. Managed. Available for Sophie's future. Not anyone else's. The following spring, Sophie and I visited Emily's grave. Fresh flowers rested beside the headstone. Birds sang in nearby trees. The world looked peaceful. Sophie sat quietly for several minutes. Then she smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen since before Emily became sick. I think Mom knew. I looked at her. Knew what? She touched the envelope resting in her lap. That one day I'd need to be brave. My throat tightened. Your mother knew a lot of things. Sophie laughed softly. Then she stood. And together we walked back toward the parking lot. The future remained uncertain. Life always is. But Emily's greatest inheritance had never been $20 million. It wasn't stocks. It wasn't property. It wasn't trust accounts. It was character. The courage to do the right thing when it would be easier not to. The wisdom to protect people instead of possessions. The strength to tell the truth even when the truth hurts. And perhaps most importantly, the understanding that love and accountability can exist together. If this story touched you, take a moment to think about the legacy you hope to leave behind. Not just money or possessions, but values. The things people will remember when you're no longer there to explain them yourself. And if you've ever seen honesty heal a family or watched someone find the courage to stand up for what is right, I'd love for you to share your thoughts. Stories like these remind us that even in difficult seasons, integrity still matters. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories about resilience, justice, forgiveness, and second chances, please consider sharing this story and subscribing for more.